What is going on, guys? I'm very excited because we're about to head up to Castle Rock, up to Applied Technology Suspension, Race Tech Service Center. Of course, my friend Tyler owns and operates up there, and he currently has Yak getting the suspension done. So he finished it up today. We're gonna go up there. So I'm not gonna have video of actually like doing the suspension because he's already done it, but we're gonna do a few tips and tricks and just update you guys on some stuff. So let's get on the road, go meet up with Tyler and pick up Blue Crew. There we go. Looks like he's putting the finishing touches on it now. Yep. All right, so we are picking up the bike. Luckily, I'm in a position where I can bring my whole bike up to Tyler and he does the suspension. But a lot of people, they just take their suspension off and he does it off the bike, obviously takes it off, but then they pick up the suspension and they put it on themselves. So one of the things that actually gets done wrong is putting your front tire back on. So what can happen if you do it incorrectly, Tyler?
So the biggest thing is that you can pinch the front end. So your forks, when you have them installed in the triple clamp, you want them to be perfectly parallel, so that way they'll move through the stroke, you know, as freely and as easy as possible. But because of the way the front end gets installed and the tire gets installed, you can actually pull one side of the fork in if you install it incorrectly, and then your forks won't be parallel. This one will be on an angle, and obviously I'm, you know, this is dramatic with my hands just showing it, but it could be at an angle, and then your forks won't move all the way through the travel as easy as they should. So we're just going to kind of show you how we put the front wheel on just to ensure that that isn't an issue. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we'll want to address the axle. So you want to look at your axle and make sure that you clean any of the grease and everything off, which we'd already done on this one, and I got some fresh grease on there. Too much grease can cause dirt to stick to it because grease is sticky. So I don't like to use a whole lot of grease. I see a lot of bikes come in that have just like grease caked everywhere on them, and there's always dirt stuck to the grease. So just enough just to kind of keep everything free and moving. Your bearings in the wheel have grease in them, so really the grease on this is just to make it so that the axle doesn't get seized in the wheel. The other thing that you want to look at is sometimes people will hit the end of their axle with a hammer to get it into the wheel, and it'll actually flare the end of this axle out, so that can grab onto the axle lug, and when this gets tightened, it can pull that axle lug in. So you want to make sure that there's no you know, mushrooming or anything on the top of this. If there is, you can just take like a file, or you can take like your bench grinder and just clean it up a little bit. And then I typically, because I have a lathe, I like to chuck the lathe or the axle up in the lathe and use a Scotch-Brite just to kind of polish it up and make sure that there isn't any, you know, nicks or anything on it, and that it's going to slide through nice and easy. So once you got your axle good to go, then you will get your front wheel into the bike. I like to, when I'm putting the front end on and I have everything off, I like to put the brake caliper on last. So you'll notice on this bike that it's dangling down there. So I like to do that. It just makes it a little bit easier to get the wheel in. You don't have to fight getting that brake caliper in. So I'll get the wheel in, slide the axle in. From there, I'll kind of push on it, make sure it's all the way in. We'll tighten down the left side pinch bolt, and then we'll move over to the other side. We'll install the brake caliper, and then we will put the axle nut on, and then we're going to torque the axle nut down to the factory specifications. Once that's done, we're going to go back to the other side. We're going to loosen the pinch bolts on the other side. From there, we're going to push down on the bike a little bit so we can get the front wheel off the ground, and we'll spin the front wheel and hit the brake a couple times. And what that's going to do is that's going to jar the axle a little bit and just allow the fork foot on the right side of the bike to just kind of sit naturally where it wants to sit, which is going to be parallel. We'll see. Yeah, see how that moved back to where it's flush now? So that was just kind of the fork just moving right back to where it wanted to. So, you know, if this would have gotten tightened down like that and torqued down and everything, this fork lug would have been pushed in like that, right? So that's going to bind everything up. The forks aren't going to want to go down all the way. You're also going to put like side load on your bushings and stuff like that. So you always want to make sure that these things are as parallel as possible. From there, once everything's all good to go, you can usually tell by a visual inspection. I can see that that's pretty good if the axle is good or not. Once everything's all good to go, we'll go ahead and tighten the pinch bolts on the left again, tighten the pinch bolts back up on the right, and then from there we're good to go. All right.
So we got the front end all dialed, everything all squared up now. We're gonna go ahead and set the race sag. I did bring my helmet and my boots just so we could get a little bit more gear on as if I was actually gonna go riding, get my weight a little bit correct for riding day. But Tyler, what tell me about race sag. What's it all about?
So one of the things that we get asked a lot is how do we come up with our sag numbers? So typically when we look for how much sag we want out of a motorcycle, it's all based out of travel, out of wheel travel. So typically we're looking for a third of travel. So on this bike in particular, we're going to be shooting for 103 millimeters. That's going to be the middle of our usable range. For a bike like this one, we probably will end up somewhere between 100 to 106, just depending on what the rider's preference is, if they like it a little high or a little low in the rear, but that 103 is going to be our middle mark. Another question that we get asked quite a bit is, why do you even need sag? What does sag do? How come you have to have it? So there's a pretty simple answer to it. Your wheel has to compress, but your wheel also has to drop down into bumps. So if you had a bike that was completely topped out while you were going along the ground and didn't have any dynamic sag in it, as soon as you hit a bump or not a bump, sorry, as soon as you hit a depression in the ground, your whole bike would move down into the ground instead of just having the rear wheel drop into the ground. So your rear end should sag, your front end should sag. We don't measure front end sag on dirt bikes just because there's so much stiction in the front end that it's hard to get a really good accurate number on it. But definitely you always want to check your rear sag. If you don't know what sag measurement to run, you can go to racetech.com, go to product search, and we list all of the sag for every motorcycle out there that you could possibly think of.
Perfect. And one thing I was talking to Tyler about, and I just legit don't know my own, so I'm going to ask him right here, is you said 100 to 106. What would happen if I ran 125 to be crazy? What if I had 125 sag?
Nothing would necessarily happen. You wouldn't break anything. The bike's not going to handle the way that you want it to. There's a front and rear balance that we're trying to stay within. So if you were to drop this bike, say down to like 102, or sorry, 120 something, you would have a really what we would call choppered out bike. So you would have like really rear end low. You wouldn't have a whole lot of weight on the front wheel. You'd probably have a skatey front end. It would probably push out in corners, some tucking of the handlebars, stuff like that. And there is some extreme scenarios where guys do run sag like that. Like Ricky Carmichael was the most notorious for it. He ran a ton of sag, like way more than anybody ever wanted him to. But typically we find that for most people, you know, our plus or minus 2 or 3 millimeters from our middle point works really well.
Perfect. That makes sense. And then so you said choppered out. If you have the end, if I did 90,
yep,
that'd be your stink bug.
Yeah, it would be stink bug.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
And then so if I wanted to change the sag, so I was at 103. Would you say I should go to 102, or like would it be like how much of a difference should you go?
I mean, it really just depends on your feel and like what you're looking for. And we've tested with guys, you know, some of the top level guys that they're so sensitive to the ride height of the motorcycle, or which is another way of talking about sag, but they're so sensitive to the ride height that we don't even measure how much sag we're getting. We're talking in like quarter of a turn of preload on the actual spring. So preload and rate are what's going to give you your sag number here. So we have a certain rate that's the correct rate for the rider, and then we compress that spring a certain amount when we put it on the shock spring. Those two things will equal how much sag you have. So you can also kind of mess with sag by doing turns on a spring. Typically on most bikes, 1 turn of a spring is equivalent to about 3 millimeters of change in sag. So if you were to take 1 turn of spring preload off on this bike, that would drop you from 103 down to 106. If you were to put 1 turn of preload on it, so to tighten it 1 turn, that would take you from 103 to about 100. And it really just depends on the rider's feel and how sensitive they are to the ride height changes. Some are just more sensitive than others. And it's really just a matter of feel. If you feel like the rear end's a little taller, if you feel like the rear end's a little bit low, and what you like in a bike, because there are guys that like a little bit more of a stink bug feel, and there are guys that like a little bit more of a chopper feel, and then you have guys that like just a neutral feel. So I always kind of recommend to play with it and see what you like. Just don't go extreme. Plus or minus 2 to 4 millimeters in either direction is, you know, a pretty safe working range.
Perfect. So great information. I asked that just for myself, and I figured maybe you guys would enjoy it too. But I'm going to throw on the boots, throw on the helmet, and we'll show you guys how to do, what is it considered, the Race Tech way to check our sag? Yeah,
this is going to be the Race Tech way with a little bit of other stuff. So we're using the Slacker digital race sag scale. This is, I've found to be a really good tool here. There's a couple little quirks with it. This little line thing sometimes can hang up. So if you're going to use one of these, You just kind of got to make sure that you're getting consistent numbers. So when I started using this one, I actually would set sag with this, and then I would double check myself with the tape measure just to make sure that I was getting the same number with both. After a certain amount of time of getting the same number, I've gone to just using this because it's almost like having a second set of hands. I can do sag all by myself without having to have the rider hold on to something, or you know, I can hold on to the bike myself and check everything, and it makes it really easy to see. But we're using this. The Motion Pro sag scale sticks are pretty good too. You just kind of got to make sure that you're doing it correctly. Another thing to note here is that we're going 90 degrees straight up from the axle to the fender for our measurement. We're not going, sometimes you'll see people that'll go up here, back here, you know, all kinds of directions. When we give you a sag number, we're talking about vertical sag, or vertical wheel travel is what we're talking about, because your wheel will actually move in an arc. So if you put it up here and check your sag, you'll get a different number than if it's here or if it's here. So we want to be straight up and down from the axle when you're checking it with Racetech sag numbers, because we're doing it again as vertical wheel travel. So we got our sag scale on. I zeroed out the sag scale. Now we got the bike on the ground. We're going to go ahead and put the rider on the bike, and then we're going to have the rider go ahead and stand up. Don't squeeze with your legs or anything. You don't really have to be in the attack position or anything. You can just be kind of neutral on the bike there. One of the reasons why we have the rider stand on the pegs is because it's a lot easier to get you into this position every time versus sitting on the seat. You can change your sag measurement by being a little bit forward or a little bit back on the seat. So we just want to be super consistent with our numbers and make sure that we're doing them all the same every time and it's repeatable. So looking at this right now, we're going to take this seat, we're going to push down just a little bit, and I get that number, and then I'm going to drop it down, and I get another number. All right, and you can go ahead and hop off. So the reason I'm pushing down and I'm pulling up on the bike is because there's a certain amount of stiction that's in this rear shock. So we're taking a low number, we're taking a high number, and then we're going to average those numbers, and that's going to be what our actual sag is. So we're shooting for 103. I knew we were going to set the sag on this bike, so I just kind of threw the spring on and knew I was going to be adjusting it. So we're shooting for 103. Right now we're sitting at 110. So we're going to go ahead and put some preload on this spring and see if we can get that pulled up. So we're just knocking the preload collars loose here. Some bikes have locking preload collars, so you'll use a punch like this. This is a Racetech tool. It's a really good tool to have. You use a punch like this to knock the top ring loose, then you'll spin the second ring. This sag is low, so we're going to put tension on the spring and we're going to tighten the collar down to raise the rear end of the bike up. So from here we will take a Sharpie, because like I said, one turn is about equivalent to 3 millimeters. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark the collar just so that way I can keep track of how many turns we've gone. And then I'm just using this punch tool to just kind of help guide the ring around. You really shouldn't have to like hit this ring to adjust it. It should spin pretty easy. If it doesn't, that might mean that you have some dirt and stuff built up under the collar, so you kind of just want to be careful of all that.
Perfect. Right at 103.
So cool. There we go. Tyler got us dialed in. Obviously, he's very he does this a lot, so he knew exactly how much to put on the rings to get them the preload to get us to 103. And you're happy with where it's at now?
Yep. Yeah, it's going to be right at 103. You know, you're wearing your boots, you're wearing your helmet, which are pretty much the two heaviest things. I don't think, do you wear a big chest protector?
Nope.
Yeah, so when you do this kind of stuff, just put your heaviest stuff that you have on. If you wear like a backpack with tools and stuff and water, stuff like that on it, you want to put that on. Helmet, boots are going to be your heaviest stuff. If you have like a big chest protector, big vest, something like that, that's going to be something that you're going to want to put on. The other thing that you can do too, if you're you know, doing this in your garage and you don't feel like putting your gear on, is you can give yourself gear. So like sometimes what we will do is we'll put you know, like a 15-pound or a 20-pound weight on the bike with the rider, just to simulate having that little bit of extra gear on there. So but yeah, it's at 103, so it should be ready to go.
Right on. Thank you, sir. we're all finished up here. We got the front tire on and put in correctly. We got the race sag set. And Tyler does this demonstration with the brakes and how it works with the suspension. And I really enjoy it. I always like when he shows it to me and shows it to my friends. So share it with you. But take it away, Tyler.
Yeah, we always get some good reactions out of this one. So one of the things that can cause your motorcycle to handle and feel really bad is using your brakes, actually. So what I would invite anybody to do, I would invite anybody to try this. So if you take your hands and you push on the bike without the brakes on, you can feel that the shock is nice and free and moving and everything. I'll push on it with one hand so that you can kind of see how much it's moving just with one hand. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to put my foot on the rear brake and I'm going to pull in the front brake and I'm going to push on it. And as you can see, once you have the brakes on, the shock doesn't work very well. The forks don't really go down either. You know, another thing that we can do is we can kind of push right here. You can kind of see that the bike is going up and down together. Same thing, if I go right here, it's not really going up and down anymore. So the reason it's doing that is because your wheels are actually a pivot. So depending on this camera angle, I don't know if you can see it, but when you push up and down on the shock, you can actually see the wheel rocking back and forth. And then same thing with the front end. If you push on the front wheel or the front end, you can see that the front wheel actually kind of rocks up and down. So the wheels are a pivot. So if you have the brakes on, those wheels aren't able to pivot. Your suspension is not able to go up and down as freely as it should. So, you know, one of the best techniques that you can get is learning how to get off your brakes when you're in the braking bumps, which is kind of sounds counterintuitive, but if you get your braking done early and before you get into any of the big bumps, it will make your suspension ride a lot smoother.
Perfect. All right, man. Like I said, I always love that. So we're going to load up, get out of here, and we'll be riding this bike on Sunday, feeling out the suspension. But always love the work that Tyler does. Applied Technology Suspension. A lot of you viewers, of course, are local Colorado guys. Tyler's here in Castle Rock. I'll have his Instagram, of course. And anything else you want to say with it?
Yeah, just if you're looking to get your suspension done, you can either contact me or contact Chris at Racetech. Even if you're not in the Colorado area, I'm friends with and know pretty much every other Racetech center that there is, and we can do what we can to get you in contact with them and get you set up.
Perfect. Like you said, contact Chris at Racetech. I'll have an email, and they'll get you in touch with the Racetech Certified Service Center and get you feeling good on your bike.
Sweet.